we are once again recording. This is the Solvable Mysteries Podcast. My name is Juras, and I'm joined by my co-host, Glenn Highcove. How are you doing, my friend? Are you ready to get into episode 40?
Yeah, 40. I can't believe it. We've done so much content already in such a short period of time. This is going to be a great episode because this was, one of the biggest aviation mysteries ever, and it's happened in kind of recent years. So it's definitely, I think, a great topic for our podcast.
Right, so if anyone is still not sure about what case we are going to be talking about today, well, we are going to be talking about the Malaysia Airlines Flight 370. Now, you said that this case has been one of the biggest mysteries. Like, from what I've been gathering, everyone's stating that this is the mystery, because the plane went essentially missing. Obviously, we're gonna get into the gist of how it went missing and all that, but essentially the plane went missing in modern times, and we have found all of the planes that went missing in modern times in regards to like the big airline planes with passengers, but this one is still a mystery. So I don't know, man. I'm definitely excited to talk about this case. A quick piece of information to our audience. This podcast is gonna go from being really smart to quite wacky, then to smart again. So just a quick piece of information, because I have some theories that happened that potentially explain what happened here, that I don't necessarily believe are 100% correct, but I still want to cover them, and they are pretty wacky. So we're gonna talk about them, but obviously let's begin with the smart part of the podcast. So I don't know, man, we sort of talked about this prior to recording. I think you should take it away because you are definitely more knowledgeable in terms of aviation, and I'll just, I guess, provide my I will chime in here and there, but I guess you're the guy in terms of planes, so I'll just let you take it away.
Awesome. Okay, let's do it. So just to give a little bit of a preface, aviation, we've only had aviation for about 100 years, and maybe a little bit longer than that. And certainly in the early days of aviation, there were a lot of disappearances. One of the most famous disappearances, I think one of the only disappearances that still kind of rivals this one, was Amelia Earhart, where it's only now that we're finding like evidence and maybe remnants of her, bone fragments, things like that, where we think, oh, okay, we think we know what happened. But as time went on and as radar got better, and as I think every time something happened, some kind of aviation disaster or disappearance, the aviation community found solutions. So they said, hey, let's, we don't know why this airplane crashed, so let's put in recorders. Let's put in things like black boxes that are flight data recorders and record voice. And of course, we have radio recordings of when flights are talking to, the air traffic control. And I think just the more technology we've seen, the less mysteries there are. I mean, I think the last time there was even anything close to a mystery that took a little while to get solved, I remember, was when I was in college. There was an airliner that I think exploded off the coast of New York, and that's one of the more memorable ones, where like that was still like a good 20 something years ago. So
right, then that's that's crazy that it actually got
that long,
took that long for another big mystery to sort of occur.
Right. So this was this was, I think, the start of this I don't know if I'll call it an accident. This incident was interesting because it happened, like they always say, these things happen in threes, and I think this is true, because you see sort of the timing of this one. Right after this, you had a couple of other major incidents, and then kind of nothing for a while. So just to set the stage, Malaysian Airlines Flight 370 was a scheduled flight from Kuala Lumpur in Malaysia to Beijing, China, mainland China. And it was one of the two main flights from the airport at Kuala Lumpur International to Beijing. This one was, kind of a red-eye flight, so it would depart at about 12:35 at midnight local time, and it was supposed to arrive in Beijing at about 6:30 a.m. local time there. And it was a pretty big flight. So just the airplane you're showing there, it's a pretty big airline. Actually, I believe it's the biggest twin jet airline, twin engine airliner that they make. It's a Boeing 777, which have been around since the 90s. They're still, but airliners get used for decades. So it's kind of a mid-age airline. It's certainly, a more modern airplane. It has a glass cockpit,
Right.
Meaning the instruments are like little panels that show a lot of information. It's not just dials and stuff.
Well, correct me if I'm wrong, but I can see that the first flight was on June 12th in 1994, but I assume the newer models are definitely more enhanced than, for say, like the ones that they made in the 90s. At least that's what I'm thinking. They probably have all the new stuff in them.
Yeah, exactly. And that actually,
Right.
it's a good point, because that plays a part in how they helped track down what they think happened in this incident. So yeah, certainly if you've traveled either domestically or internationally, these days, planes have not just phones, but they have like internet, they have multimedia stuff going on, they have entertainment, they have monitors in the seats. And this is, I think, I would say this kind of airplane was sort of the start of that era. So that was this is where it's significant. This kind of airline was when they really started pivoting towards. I think it might even be fly by wire, where they instead of having everything be mechanically connected, that they had more like electrical connections.
By the way,
in an airliner.
By the way, a really quick interruption here. We can see the airliners like the Boeing 777 cockpit, and it looks a lot more cramped than I expected it to look. It looks like there's not that much room in here. It almost looks like a car.
It's funny. I always get kind of blown away when I see the inside of a cockpit, because they always look a lot less comfortable than I figure they would be.
Exactly.
Like for some reason, to your point, like you pay for a luxury car, or even a mid-range car, not even a mid-range, not even an expensive car, and they have comfortable seats and leather and wood paneling.
No doubt.
And you look at the inside of a jetliner, and sometimes it looks downright uncomfortable. The other thing, though, to your point, is that's been a trend. Is in the old days, it would take 4 or 5 people to run an airliner, and now it's usually just 2.
And
usually
actually,
everything...
right. Probably I'm gonna be right by saying that there's no need for the second pilot, right? Like in theory,
Yeah, he's more there. Like the people are really there for a backup, and
yes.
I actually had a conversation with our friends over at the Fighter Pilot podcast. So I met up with Vincent. Yeah, Vincent came, and he and I had a good talk. I think the week before last, and it was pretty interesting talking to him. But I was talking. He flies for a major airliner. He flies a 757, which is actually kind of an older airplane now, unlike this one. So you can see in this photo you're looking at, that's what's called a glass cockpit. Okay. So all those little panels in front of him, yes. you can change sort of the information being displayed. He actually flies an older airplane that is all dials and gauges and things. So that's older, but even those, it's like the airplane could basically fly itself with almost, other than someone twisting a dial and changing settings, you don't even really have to touch the flight controls, and it can even land itself. And that's really old technology.
Right. Last piece of, I guess, information that I want to get straightened out here, because I always wondered, and I never actually got the chance to ask anyone, does a plane actually even need a pilot in theory? Could it like perform the whole operation without one? It probably can't, right? There's no way, because someone needs to like drive it around in the airport while it's
exactly.
right. Okay, so for
Yeah.
those reasons, the pilot needs to like be full hands on deck operational, and once it's essentially flying, it's almost always in autopilot, right?
Yeah, I mean, they really do. I mean, just for a lot of good reasons, but I think some of it's just airliner policy that they want to try to have the safest
Exactly. I mean,
flight as possible.
That's a good business decision, because these events definitely can make a company go bankrupt.
Yeah, I mean, it is a good point. It is funny that you're right. The part that probably to the pilot seems the most mundane, which is driving it around on the ground, that's actually the most technically challenging obstacle to automation.
Oh my God, exactly.
And the same thing for cars, right? Isn't that funny that we often think of driving a car as a simpler and easier task than flying an airplane? And in a lot of ways, it's certainly safe. There's less can go wrong on the ground, or maybe there's like less fatal consequences depending on how fast you're going. But yeah, for a computer, that's also the hardest part, is to do the things that, especially in an airport when you have those huge wings.
Yes.
I mean, all the time planes have some kind of accident on the ground in an airport, like they knock into another airplane or knock into a truck or something. So yeah, this was just a normal flight, just all around the world. It's kind of amazing, especially before this COVID stuff, to think of just the thousands and thousands of flights that go on every day, flawlessly, without a hitch, completely safe. The amazing maintenance and just the well-oiled machine that commercial flight is these days. That you can go, I mean, you're asked like you could, in theory, you could be here like in a day and a half.
Right.
Just jump on a plane, you go through it's like the hardest part is actually the paperwork. It's not even the mechanical part. Isn't that funny? That's where we are now compared to 60, 80 years ago.
Right. I mean, that's great. I feel like that's great.
Yeah.
I think we've talked about the fact that how quickly technology went upgraded itself during the industrialization age. We essentially went from having no planes, no nothing, to having fighter jets with bombs in 50 years. So I guess that's what the war does, right? We need to because essentially airplanes were developed for war reasons, so this is why we have the technology, because and this is just, I guess, the results for because of the First and Second World Wars. We really need to go fast in terms of aviation, innovations, and we clearly did.
Yeah, I mean, it's just an exponential march of technology, advancement of technology, and to your point, because of weapons research, now you're seeing stuff like hypersonic. Let's call them flying vehicles. They're not manned yet, but hypersonic is flying at many times the speed of sound, and it's a whole other fascinating topic that is pretty cool to explore, because the faster you go, the more friction and the more heat it generates, and it's a whole other set of physics that are involved. So in this plane, as I mentioned, is a big plane. It's made for long distance travel. I believe the ER stands for extended range, in the model number 77720 ER. So the flight was supposed to be 5 hours and 34 minutes, and as per usual, planes don't just hold enough gas to just barely make it. They hold enough fuel to have some kind of safety margin in case they need to go into a holding pattern when they get there, or they need to divert to another airport. Things happen. So this thing was full of fuel. The point of that is it had plenty of range. So we had two people flying the airplane. The first person, who we'll talk about, was the first officer, who was a fairly young man. He was 27 years old. He was actually still being trained. In fact, this was going to be his last training flight so that he would be fully certified for the airline I believe, to probably just have that degree of confidence in the airline and him and his skills. So he's essentially being graded on this flight.
Oh,
And
that was the case,
yeah,
right? Because I didn't get this piece of information. I just thought that this guy was essentially already like not obviously not well established, but he was already like having his official position was like a pilot, not like a junior
yeah,
pilot or anything like that.
yeah. I mean, I believe he is, but I think like just in terms of how the airline views him, or
Right.
maybe whether they would be comfortable having him without someone more senior there. I think maybe that was the
Right.
context.
So
But yeah, it's
his
a good point.
so his name was Farik Hamid. Right.
Yep.
So he was 27 years of age, uh, and pretty much this was his training flight. Oh, so this was a training flight for him, because I can see it in the script you have marked. Also, it was his last one. Yeah. So you basically, oh yeah. So he would soon be fully certified. So yeah, you've mentioned this in the script. So yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I guess I should clarify that. Like, it doesn't mean he was still getting his license or any of that. I mean, like someone like this, they've gotten their licensing. They've worked their way up through flight school and qualifications and being able to fly the model. This is just more like, I think, certifying to the airline, the maturity of the person and maybe their competence with the specific airplane they're using.
Right, you
So
want to, yeah. Just before
yeah.
you move forward, I was just wondering, you're going to like cover a little bit about him, because there's some interesting information regarding Farik Hamid. So, I mean, just what I have on this
Yeah,
man.
go ahead.
So he was, from all sources, he was like a really smart person. He was also someone who was taking things really seriously, like a professional. Even though he was 27, he was acting like a true professional. And it seemed that his life was definitely on an upward swing at that point. He was set to get married with another fellow pilot. So, that's just the information that I have on this man, that he was also, like having a pretty good time living his life.
Yeah, I mean, it makes sense. I mean, certainly flying an airplane like that is a position of great responsibility. And, I think probably, especially in countries that are not affluent, but even in affluent countries, it's a position of prestige to be an airline pilot,
No doubt.
to have that kind of
Oh yeah, definitely.
technical,
Yeah. I mean, a
expertise.
lot of people, they dream about becoming like pilots, essentially. But not everyone obviously gets to do that. So the people that get to do that, they are definitely privileged.
Yeah, it probably goes without saying that someone like this is definitely a winner in life.
Oh yeah,
they're
no
yeah,
doubt.
but because they're putting their neck on the line,
Every
and they're
every
having
every
to.
day, right?
Yeah, every day. I mean, I mean, it's it's something we don't think about that much, but when you fly, just flying one flight is like, just from a health perspective, that's like a whole year's worth of dental X-rays.
Jeez.
Yeah, so
What?
that's something that's interesting we don't think
Oh
about, but
wow. Yeah.
because when you're up at those altitudes, there's less atmosphere in the way, you actually get a lot of radiation exposure. So it's
Oh
always something
man.
I always wonder if there's a higher cancer rate
Right.
and things like that for pilots. There's health risk associated with it, and it's also one of those things where when things go wrong in the air, they go really wrong. We talked about that in the helicopter episode. And, helicopters are an especially
In the
egregious example of that.
Kobe
But
Kobe Bryant episode, right?
yeah, our Kobe Bryant episode. But even with I mean, there's sometimes I watch YouTubes about like different aviation incidents,
Right.
and whether it's like commercial airlines or private airplanes, and yeah, a lot of things go wrong, and these pilots, these men and women who are pilots, have to be exceptionally calm, kind of in the most terrifying moments of their lives. And I think that's one of the reasons why so many of them get recruited from the military, because that's almost a good funnel to try to get people who are mentally very tough, and who also have, of course, exceptional piloting skills.
Makes
So
perfect sense. Yeah.
So speaking of, someone with exceptional piloting skills, someone who's mature, and someone who is a professional, was his trainer. So his trainer was a man named Zahari Ahmad Shah. He was a captain for Malaysian Airlines, and he was, in fact, at age 53, says here, one of the most senior captains at Malaysia Airlines. So this is like a really senior employee and someone with a lot of experience, and I think that makes sense why he would be training somebody who was more than 20 years his junior. And I guess something to think about as we go on with this episode is at this point he had kind of done a lot with his life, and he'd kind of been there and seen it. So he was married. He had 3 adult children. He's, I guess probably fairly affluent because he'd been doing this job for a long time. So he lived in a gated development. He owned 2 houses.
Wow.
And it's worth pointing out. So that one of the things they pointed out about him was that in one of his houses he had an elaborate setup for his Microsoft Flight Simulator. Now I'll say that this isn't just something that pilots do. Even people like me. And I'm not even on the extreme end of this. There's people that build out their whole own cockpits and stuff, and they never fly any airplanes. And I'm one of those people that I have no desire to fly a real plane, but I love flying, gaming planes. But there's some people that do both.
Yeah.
In fact, one of the sister podcasts to Fighter Pilot Podcast, they have a spinoff now. One of their shows is people that, like me, love the simulators, and funny enough, some of those folks on that show actually fly real life airliners. So
right.
that, to me, that's kind of amazing to me that somebody could love flying that much, that not only do they fly, what I mean,
real planes, but they also fly the simulators
they fly
as well,
like computer planes. Yeah, but I guess I think for Zahari, it's worth pointing out that in his case, it's an actual training tool. So Microsoft Flight Simulator, which has been around for decades and has been, progressively iterated, and I believe is due for a new, after they didn't do like a new one for almost 10 years. They're about to put out a new version of it finally.
Right.
It's the depending on what kind of options you elect for and what extra content you buy, it is potentially a pro tool. A pro training tool where you can have it simulate the physics and the actual procedures, and that's one of the best ways to train for something is to do it when your neck isn't actually in the light. To me that was the mark of a professional, that he's willing to practice and hone his skills. So it seems like someone that takes flying really seriously, and seems to be, I would say, even once again, someone who's maybe fascinated with the whole aspect of flying.
Right.
That's how much into it they are. Okay, so it sounds like he was known for being a pretty decent guy. It says here that he was allegedly, I mean, I guess up until this point,
right,
there wasn't really a lot. I mean, we're going to talk about later on about some other things that are alleged, but there was nothing glaring. Certainly you and I have covered people in this show who have been big red flags around them that
no doubt
problematic behavior. I mean, we've run into people that we've covered in this show that can't even make it out of their teens before they imploded in life and did something awful. But this guy was not one of them. He had a very distinguished career since 1981.
Yeah.
And he had flown actually several different models of airliners too. So he'd flown 737s. So 737 is like the Honda Accord of jetliners, or the Toyota Camry of jetliners.
Right.
Airbus 330, and then finally Boeing 777. And he had 18,000 hours of flying experience, which is a very respectable and kind of a tremendous amount of flying hours. It is worth pointing out that commercial pilots are able to accrue those hours much more quickly than military pilots are. So a military pilot, the most you'll usually see a military pilot that flew their whole career, for like 20-25 years. They might have 4,000 5,000 hours at the top.
Right.
But for a commercial pilot, it's not unusual to be somewhere between 10 to 20.
Makes sense, because like you're not flying all the time when you're in the military, right? I feel like during war times, those hours could like pick up quite quickly, but like during like standard procedures, but you're flying like every once in a while. So obviously these pilots, the commercial pilots, they actually probably even have even more experience than the military pilots, like the well-established ones, like this guy right here,
Yeah, especially if you're flying back and forth like a few times a week. It seems like you could very quickly, and flying 5-6 hours at a time like he was each way. It seems like it'd be very easy to accrue a lot of hours. So I'll just expedite the rest of this intro.
Yeah.
Also on the plane were 10 flight attendants, and there were 227 passengers to care for, including only 5 children, interestingly, out of that whole. So it must have been more of a business flight. Most of the passengers were Chinese ethnically, or I guess nationally. So I'm assuming that's mainland Chinese.
Yeah.
Of the rest, 38 were Malaysian, and then there were just a small amount of others from other countries like Indonesia, Australia, India, France, US, Iran, Ukraine, Canada, New Zealand, the Netherlands, Russia, and Taiwan. So why are we having this show today? Well, something went wrong. So we're going to, right now, before we go into what we think happened, we're going to talk about what is known. And then after that, we're going to talk about some of the many theories that have come up before we do our own Solvable Mysteries podcast solution to this. Yeah. So, what was happening that night was the first officer who was training, he was actually hands-on control. So he was essentially doing the actual flying while Captain Zahari handled the radios. So by handle the radios, it means like what happens is when you're flying, you're constantly changing radio frequencies and talking to different air traffic controllers, because you're flying across vast swaths of the earth, and there's different. It's not even like just the place you are in the map, it's even how high you are. So you could be on one place in the map, and 3 different people could be handling different elevations of where you're handling.
Okay. Yeah. I didn't know that. That's actually really interesting.
Yeah. There's a whole. I mean, it's very well mapped out and very well organized, but especially when you think about how you have all these countries speaking different languages. So I believe.
Yeah.
I believe everybody speaks English. That's like the agreed on language for all these controllers. So that's fascinating in itself. You have everybody speaking English to do air traffic control, because that's what we call the lingua franca now.
Why can't we like set it to Estonian? You know what I'm saying?
Oh my gosh, yeah, it'll be hard.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, it's funny because I said lingua franca because French used to be the language that everybody spoke for hundreds of years. That was sort of the English of the era, but then now, because of just post-war stuff, it's English now. So that's part of it. And then you have to have all these agreements between these different countries to cooperate, so that we don't have airliners slamming into each other or arriving at the wrong time, etc. So even just handling the radios. This is why there's still 2 people involved, and why there used to be more. There used to be a dedicated person just for communications, is because you have to change different radios, and while you're changing radios, you're changing course, you're setting altitude. There's a lot to pay attention to, and this is why there's still 2 people involved. So until it's totally computerized, essentially 2 people have to be the brains of the airplane, and there's enough work steering the airplane and keeping it from doing the wrong thing, that just handling the radios is still a job to do. And that, I think that just showed that Captain Zahari was confident in the pilot's abilities, Freak's abilities. So the plane takes off, and they start to gain altitude, and at 1:01 a.m., the pilot, the Captain Zahari, radioed that they had leveled off at 35,000 feet.
Right.
And now what's interesting is he starts acting in a way that's not, for somebody that's been doing the job so long, he starts doing things that are a little bit unusual by the standards of, how this goes every day. So they said that usually you don't report that you've reached the altitude. You only report when you're leaving the altitude. I didn't know that.
Okay, yeah, I definitely didn't know that. Like, just to quickly chime in, I guess, it's definitely odd, for someone who was that well established in the essentially flying game, in the market of flying planes, to make these rookie-like mistakes, so it's odd, it's definitely odd. That's all I'm gonna say.
Yeah, it's weird. It makes you feel like there was something on his mind, or I don't know. Right. For some reason, he wanted to get his words out, or I guess you could also say, well, maybe he was trying to be more verbal in front of his trainee, so that the trainee would pay attention to what the heck was going on. Maybe that's like, nudge, nudge. We can, you notice we hit the altitude we were supposed to, right? Did you pay attention to that? So maybe you can say that.
Right. Just to I guess sort of emphasize that everything is fine.
Yeah, and that and what to pay attention to. Okay, so then, as the flight is crossing the Malaysian coastline and setting across the South China Sea towards Vietnam, which I believe it had to overfly to get to Beijing at 1:08. He again reports the elevation at 35,000 feet. So once again, that's weird. Like, why are you talking about this so much, dude?
Okay. That's weird, right?
Yeah. So then,
okay.
Here's where it gets really complicated. Is we're talking about an airplane that's flying in an area that not only has a lot of international borders, and these are international. It's also in an area that has a lot of political contention, and there's a little bit of there's some.
It's all over the place. This whole area of the world is crazy. Like borders are like nowhere else on the planet. Like even from this little piece of the map that we're seeing right now, you can tell that what the hell even is this? Like, oh my God.
You're talking about an area that has been fought over, whether it was World War II or the Vietnam conflict, or further north, the Korean conflict, and now because of China's expansion militarily, it's an area that's in contention. So right now, and this is going to play into the whole case, there's sort of a Cold War going on between these countries, where there's a lot of oil and other resources out there nearby, and there's always the possibility that like another war could erupt. I mean, right. Thailand itself had a coup, and essentially the military took over. So it's not like these places are all that stable. It's interesting that Vietnam might be one of the most stable countries,
right? Exactly.
In the whole area.
That's the craziest part about it. That from like the little geopolitics that I do understand about, Southern Asia. Vietnam seems like it's like the most stable and normal country, but a steadily growing economy.
Yeah,
and
rule of law,
right?
Yeah,
we all know about like what happened in Vietnam back in the day, So
yeah. I mean, 50 years ago we were bombing the crap out of them, and now today they're one of the most stable and actually one of our best allies in the area.
Right. I think that's great, but that's also pretty funny,
Yeah. Well, meanwhile, like Malaysia and Indonesia and places like that are nearby,
oh my God,
are actually far less stable politically, even though in theory they are democracies, or it's just there's a lot more corruption and stuff going on. So it's pretty fascinating. So this all plays into it. So yeah, this is where it gets a little fraught. Is that and it's possible that this is why what happened the way it did. So as the airplane approaches sort of the handoff point between Malaysian air controllers and Vietnamese air controllers. The Kuala Lumpur Center, so the air traffic control for Malaysia, sort of the departing controller says, oh, okay, it talks to them and basically tells them, contact Ho Chi Minh. So that's the air traffic control for Vietnam.
Yeah.
As they're crossing sort of the air border, at this new frequency, and then good night. And he goes, oh, good night. And, and it says, repeats the flight. But he did not repeat the frequency as he should have.
By the way,
so once again, this is, yep.
A quick little interruption. I have like the whole conversation here. I have the audio. Now it's 7 minutes long. I definitely don't want to play it all. So I'm assuming we can hear it in the ending statements. So wait, he forgot, the pilot of Malaysian Airlines 370 forgot to actually mention one last sentence, right? Which was customed, essentially, right?
Yeah, you could even hear if you buy like a radio scanner or any kind of aviation radio, and just listen to airliners. There's a pattern you're supposed to follow, right, so that everybody kind of knows that everybody's doing the right thing. So
can we just quickly?
You say,
yeah. Oh yeah. So what were you supposed to say? Like, I don't want to interrupt you.
Yeah. So you're supposed to, to acknowledge the control. Like, when the controller says something to you,
yes,
you're supposed to acknowledge you heard it.
Okay.
And then acknowledge what you're supposed to do, and then say you're doing what they told you to do. So the guy said good night, but he never said like, oh, I'm turning to that frequency.
Oh,
he just said good night.
Right. Yeah. Oh, okay. Now it makes sense. Okay, let's see.
370 maintaining level 350.
Malaysian 370. Malaysian 370, contact Ho Chi Minh 120.9. Good night.
Good night, Malaysian 370.
Oh, now I get it. Because this whole situation with the communications, was really sort of, if you're not into airplanes and you're not into aviation, it's really hard to really grasp what all of these transmissions are supposed to mean. But now that you've explained it to me and that we listen to it, let's listen to it one more time, just in case any of our audience didn't missed what was actually happened. So as you can see,
Malaysian 370. Malaysian 370, contact Ho Chi Minh 120.9. Good night.
Right, so essentially the ATC people from the Malaysian airport, right? What is the position called, the people that are in contact with the airplanes? Are they like, do you know what I'm talking about?
Yeah, the air traffic controllers.
Right, the air traffic controllers, right. So ATC essentially said Malaysian 370 contact Ho Chi Minh 120.9 good night. So essentially what people in the cockpit were supposed to say that they heard, or wait, should they say good night first, or should they say good night after they already confirmed that they will contact Ho Chi Minh?
Yes, they're supposed to say good night at the very end. So they should say like whatever the frequency was, like 23.1 Malaysian Air 370 good night, or so that would be the kind of the pattern you're supposed to follow, and that way the air traffic controller feels good that that he heard your instructions, because it's really important to hear the instructions, that the pilot knows what frequency to go to. Because sometimes people get stuff wrong; they have to get corrected, and then finally, just that everyone's saying goodnight. They're pretty nice to each other. Sometimes they're making jokes and stuff, even when they get bored up there. So everybody's kind of talking to each other, and I think that everyone's kind of grateful when things go well.
So basically, essentially, what the pilot missed or did not say was that he was going to contact Ho Chi Minh, right? Because ATC basically said contact Ho Chi Minh 120.9 good night, and then the cockpit said this.
Good night, Malaysian 370.
just good night Malaysian 370. That's all he said. So yeah, I guess he missed on that last part, which is definitely interesting.
Yeah, like I said, it seems to be a little bit of foreshadowing. So this is where things start to get weird is, the Vietnamese controllers, they're watching radar and they're busy, right? Everyone's busy at this job. No one's bored doing an air traffic controller job. There's a lot of airplanes. There's a lot to handle. It's one of the most stressful jobs you can imagine.
I feel like it's even more stressful than being the actual pilot. I heard somewhere that you have to be just as calm and as professional and as well equipped mentally to do that job as to do the job that the pilots do. That's also a crazy job to do.
I would say it's like the same level of like having to manage a bunch of things at once as like playing StarCraft or something. Like it's
oh wow.
And by the way, I'm not good at StarCraft. So
right, which is a StarCraft for people that don't know. Is like a video game that's you have to do so much stuff at the same time. I also never played that game, but I just know it's notorious for like doing a lot of stuff at once. So it definitely illustrates what these guys are doing on a daily basis.
Yeah, I'll say there's lots of YouTube videos of people playing each other, and it's fascinating to watch that. But it's also fascinating.
They're like robots almost.
Yeah, just watching it. It's like watching a chess game almost, but like way more interesting in some ways. But I'll say that for the air traffic control, you can actually download simulators that like give you the experience of having to route different airplanes. You basically use like keyboard shortcuts and stuff to try to like pretend to do the voice part. Okay. So you're trying to get in those games, because this is what the responsibilities are of these air traffic controllers. Airplanes are coming from from different directions, and they're going to different places, and you have to get them to not be too near each other, and to go from a higher to a lower altitude as they go to the airport, or vice versa. If they're coming out of the airport, to get them to the high altitude and get them to the next zone. So that's what's going on. Is this zone that they were supposed to contact in Ho Chi Minh? It's like the incoming zone that was supposed to basically pass them through the area and get them onto Beijing. So what happens is the Vietnamese controllers, they're busy. They see this airplane pop up in their radar, and then suddenly disappear. And they didn't
take notes.
So there's a lot of finger pointing from this point on. This is where, even though there's a lot of finger pointing, when we get to the end, I'm going to have my own opinion about this, and actually compared to some of the things I've said about other people in areas of responsibility, I think you'll be surprised what I have to say about this. But apparently the controllers on the Vietnam side, Ho Chi Minh, misunderstood a policy. And once again, this is where it gets difficult when you have lots of different countries, everybody speaking a different language, but trying to speak English, and just different levels of training and different, I guess, agreements that may or may not be in place. So apparently the controllers were supposed to immediately alert the other zone if they had something that had been handed off to them. Like, because this is all scheduled, right? These flights are not a surprise. They're all scheduled. They're
I hope they're not surprises.
No. I mean, the flight plans are filed weeks and months in advance. There's a whole bunch of like if you take an airplane and you're flying through these controlled areas, like if you fly an airplane from here to Russia, like you need to file a flight plan. There's paperwork.
I mean, so if you're flying to Russia, you probably need some like extra stuff also. Who knows what you need? Anti-missile defense systems on your airplane. You need a lot of stuff. Flares. Yeah.
It's
flying into Russia is a little bit. It's a different experience.
It's definitely tough. So apparently they were supposed to contact them if there were any airplanes that were more than 5 minutes late checking in. Now it does say here they did repeatedly try to contact the aircraft, couldn't get a hold of them, and they said by the time they called Kuala Lumpur to let them know, hey, something's wrong here, about 18 minutes had passed. Now, I think this is where there's going to be a lot of opinions back and forth, and I'm going to just reserve that for now. So,
yeah, definitely.
I think there's a lot of confusion after that, and it says here that basically the folks that should have been alerted had not been, I think, because of the confusion about, once again, it crossed international borders, it went into places that probably, maybe just for whatever reason weren't totally on top of alerting things, and there's a lot of finger pointing between Vietnam and Malaysia about whose fault this was. But by 2:30 a.m.
Yeah.
And mind you, this thing's supposed to land at 6. They still hadn't alerted the main emergency folks, and by the time the real response started, it was at exactly the time that the airplane should have been landing in Beijing. So this is where they start searching, and
so essentially this is really crazy. I just wanted to quickly interrupt you because you are doing the heavy lifting on this episode, so I want you to take a little bit of a breather. Like, for me, this case was so crazy because just imagine the scene, right? There's a bunch of people waiting for, in the airport, essentially, in the parking lots, wherever, waiting for their like family members, friends, co-workers, etc., to essentially land in Beijing, because a lot of these people were from China. So there were definitely some people that were waiting for them, So they are waiting for this flight, from what I've gathered. The actual air, traffic dashboards, like when this plane is arriving and when that plane is arriving, essentially, that's you sort of go to the airport and you look at those dashboards to see when the plane that you are waiting for will arrive. And this was crazy to me, the fact that they kept displaying delayed. Even when they found out that this plane was missing, they just kept showing a delayed on those dashboards, which is a normal thing to do. You don't have the information what is actually happening, but the crazy part is how the people that were waiting for the for the people to arrive in Beijing, how were they feeling at that moment? That was probably a crazy scene, or everyone involved, since the search began at the same time when it was supposed to land. So someone was like looking at like the I don't know, at like the schedules and whatnot, and they this plane hasn't arrived yet. I wonder where this plane is it. Oh wow, we can't find this plane. So it was probably a situation like that where it's this was complete chaos and complete mess.
Yeah, and this is where I think, it gets a little bit complex after this, and we'll go into why certain things happen the way they did. But
this map just I guess illustrates how complex we could go, but we're definitely not gonna go this complex. But it's a complex thing,
It's so what happened was, and this we'll go into. Here's what they know happened when they looked at radar, and then eventually there was another way that they were able to trace it after it got off for radar. That what it looks like happened was right after the pilot got the handoff to Ho Chi Minh Center, the airplane turned off its transponder. So the transponder, a transponder is like a little, it's like a little beacon. It's like a little thing it's a little radio thing that transponds. It says who you are. It would be like how you see buses that have signs on them that say, this is a bus that goes from this street to that street. Yeah. Or you see taxi cabs that have signs. This is even better. So because radar is not perfect, and radar at any moment, there's a lot of things to scan, it would be very confusing for air traffic controllers. It would be impossible, really, for them to just try to look at radar and try to match it up or try to keep track of who was who. So what it is it's just a way to tell all the computers and all the radars and all the air traffic control centers, like, this transponder says who you are. Yeah. It says it has a number that's been assigned to you so that it matches with the records. Right. And actually, it even provides a way for you to signal if something's wrong. So if your radio's not working, or if terrorists took over your cockpit, like they were asking people to do. This is one of the reasons why they knew something was wrong during the 9/11 thing. Was I think one of the airplanes had a weird code on it, but then also some of those airplanes turned off their transponders. So what happens is, when a transponder goes off, it's usually a sign that either the airplane has crashed already,
Right.
which that would be one reason why the transponder went off, or in the case of this airplane, something deceptive is going on. So that's
right.
Yeah.
So, a quick interruption, because I also did a little bit of digging in regards to the transponders. So there were two of them on this plane, and they were essentially where they are located. They're not located in the cockpit. They're located somewhere below, in the lower levels of the airplane. But at the same time, the I guess the little button, which was actually a button or like a switch. With one switch, you could turn both transponders off, was located in the cockpit. So, it's definitely weird how you could turn off the transponders by just a push of a switch like that. But actually, there's a good reason that the pilots are given this ability. In the case of electric malfunction, they actually would have to try to as quickly as possible to detect the link that's causing the electric malfunctions, and for say if the transponder was the reason that the malfunctions are happening, they need a quick way to determine that. So that's why they have the ability to turn it off and on, just in the case of an emergency. But obviously, this case in particular proved that it also could be a design fault as well, in a certain way. You probably need to have something installed where you could check the transponders without actually having the ability to turn them off, because in the case of a certain attacker or something like that, this could be a very, very bad thing if the transponders stop working.
Yeah, you have to have access to all the electrical controls, because it is not unheard of that something might be affecting some of your other instruments. And you might need to actually turn off something. Just or sometimes even just because you're losing electrical power, you might need to shut off electrical power to other.
Right.
To
By
other
the way,
aircraft.
the last thing that I wanna mention, I just grabbed this infographic, the first infographic, transponders images, and it has the Malaysian Airlines model. So this is what it is. Yeah.
It made transponders famous. I mean, it's also worth mentioning that you actually you set the, even though maybe the transponder itself is in another part of the airplane, you set the code up there to the cockpit. So when you check in, often either pre-flight or sometimes even during your flight, and especially if there's like I said, if suddenly you figure out your radios aren't working, there's actually a code you put in that immediately alerts air traffic control that they need to treat you specially. Because if you lose your radio, which happened, then air traffic control knows they need to basically route everybody else around you and try to figure out some way to signal to you that you can land.
I don't want to have that job. Air traffic control sounds like a horrible thing to do. It's definitely not for me, man.
The simulator was really, really stressful. I've tried it, and it's like a game, but it's not a game because it's
not. It's definitely not for everyone. And I'm definitely one of the persons who doesn't need to have anything to do with the air traffic control ever. I feel like I would. Oh my God! Things would not go well if I was in charge of that.
So, what happened was here's as far as anybody knew, what it looked like it did was it basically pulled a U-turn and then flew across the Malay Peninsula and then banked around the island of Penang. So it did this really like strange zigzaggy course, and then from there it flew.
We could see it, right? We could see it like how the course essentially, if someone's watching this, it's a complete, it's a complete like almost like a 280 degree turn, something like that, right? So it's like it completely it essentially went back to Malaysia. Interestingly, through like the parts of Thailand and Malaysian borders. So that's definitely an interesting route.
Yeah, it just was completely off course from where it was supposed to be, and then as far as
by the way, past Georgetown in Penang Island, and funny enough, this is the island where the main pilot grew up.
Oh, funny! I didn't realize that.
Oh, you didn't realize that?
Yeah.
Okay. Because this is like a big thing. This is a big thing where, the plane essentially tipped its wing a little bit during this flight, almost as if the main pilot was, taking a little look. Yeah. So I mean, we're not jumping to conclusions yet, but it is what it is.
So. As far as until some more information came out later, as far as the civilian authorities were concerned, shortly thereafter, it sort of disappears from what they call secondary radar, which means that just even like the most basic kind of radar.
Right.
So not the best way to keep track of it, but just whatever radar the civilian authorities had access to, had disappeared. Now, what was mysterious about this, and I think once again ended up with a lot of finger pointing about whether the Malaysian government was being very truthful about the whole event, was that some other details came out. So at first it was like, oh wow, it must have just crashed right there, right? Because that's where you said that was the last place we saw it on radar, and so let's go send all the ships to look there, and maybe there's survivors. If not, at least we'll find the black box, because it'll hit the water, and it'll, when something hits the water, even when it tries to land on the water, usually they just fly into a billion pieces. So, really you're thinking you're probably just going to find wreckage and but maybe a black box, a recorder to understand what happened. But that turned out not to be the case. So what happened was actually two things. So one was secretly the Malaysian military actually still had special secret radar that they were using, for national defense. And on those radars, which they didn't really want to talk about, because once again, they have a lot of their enemies in the area or competitors.
Like, especially in this place, I would, if this was happening somewhere like, I don't know, man, like in like Netherlands or something like that, it's like no one really cares if someone, shares their information, like military information, since the NATO and everyone's sort of sharing information regardless, but like in a place like this, in these like literally like treacherous waters where no one knows what the hell is the other side planning, like no one knows like what like Cambodia is planning, what Thailand is planning, what Vietnam is doing, what China's plans are, like Indonesia as well, like what the hell are these people doing down there, like it's a treacherous place and no one wants to share their secrets, it definitely makes perfect sense, right?
Yeah, I mean that's exactly the case. So yeah, I mean the for a long time it turns out the Malaysian government sat on this info, but they actually had a longer flight path recorded, and because of that, it turns out that a lot of the searches that happened in the wrong place, and a lot of the especially people in China got angry about this, that they felt like they'd been deceived or that the time was wasted, because it turns out that some of these, turns out when an airplane like this crashes, there's like a little sonar ping that goes off if it goes in the water, but that thing only has a battery life of about 30 days.
Why?
And apparently
That's why. Also another thing.
Yeah.
Also another thing. Why why does the cockpit have a video? I guess like audio recording, like maximum audio recordings of like 2 hours. Like that's what it has. Like I've read into somewhere that like I think like the black box or like something like that. Like I'm not gonna get into the technicalities, but like to get like the audio from the cockpit when an accident happens, like you have like something like 2 hours of like audio recorded. So another big question, why?
You know, it's weird. It's weird, but I think it has to do with because there's so many complicated systems involved. I mean, you're right. It doesn't make sense. Like if it was, like
the plane costs like 100 million.
Right. I mean, you look at like even an ancient iPod could collect way more audio, right? So, I mean, what's crazy is on the Fighter Pilot podcast,
and the last thing, the audio is always messed up. You're never gonna get a clear audio. Like this is what you get. Like I'm just gonna quickly play it to you. This is what you get. This is the type of audio you get.
Solvable 180.
It's always buzzing. It's not a good quality audio. So planes are definitely finding good ways to save money.
Yeah, I mean, what's crazy is it's even the case on the military. I was listening to the Fighter Pilot podcast, and they were talking about one of the main strike fighters, and a lot of them are still using like computer technology from the 80s and early 90s, where it's crazy. Like they don't even have. Anyways,
okay, but like
it's a common issue. Yeah, right, it is unfortunate. So yeah, I mean, this is the other thing. So it turns out that like some of the ways that it would have been easier to find the aircraft became basically expired by the time they figured out where it probably really did crash, and even then, there were a lot of false leads. So there was a lot of finger pointing and a lot of like frankly political stuff that went on. There was even like a boycott of Malaysian goods and services by people in China for a while because of this. There were a lot of people that were angry about their families, and I think frankly that the governments involved also took advantage of that. So I think like the government was.
I just quickly wanted to interrupt as well.
Yeah.
Like, the government was super shady at the time. Like the prime minister, they found like I'm not gonna some sort of a bags like over like a few hundred like Gucci bags in his like home filled with like millions and millions of like dollars. So this is like the prime minister of Malaysia at the time. So just to keep things brief, you definitely know that these guys were not like the most honest people about like their line of work, and they did some shady stuff,
Yeah, it is one of the more corrupt countries in the area. And then, on China's side, there's a saying that you never let a like a disaster or something like that go to waste. So like God. China had nice ammo. Now China's the victim, and then they can use that as sort of a crowbar for their negotiations with those countries. Like, oh, well, now you need to give us this, or now you need to do that.
China is really good at that, by the way. Like,
China
exactly. Is like they almost invented this.
It's like in soccer when when like you get hurt and you roll around on the ground, play a fish, and then you get the goal shot. So like the penalty shot. So like they're really good at that. So
but lastly, what China actually claims that they own essentially the moon, and this is like a legitimate claim because back in the day, some ancient Chinese I guess like authors and stuff like that, they wrote like books and stories about like someone in like something around like how there's like people on the moon, and like there's like the moon goddess, and she's Chinese. Like, so basically that means that China has like the historic claim over the moon. So like it's just illustrates what's up,
Well, and that plus they keep building islands in the South China Sea.
Yep.
So to expand their borders basically illegally. So anyways, there was a whole bunch of controversy about that. I know this part's going pretty long. So before we get to the theories,
Yeah.
well, actually, why don't we go ahead and well, actually, before we do that, let's say the last piece of evidence. So there was a kind of satellite communication device that was on the plane, and that was how they knew that the plane didn't crash right away, and that it, in fact, flew for several hours afterwards. Was that there's like kind of an automatic pinging, an automatic communication that happens between this satellite communications device and like sort of like the server in the cloud. So
Yeah.
like what they know is it did keep on making communications back and forth, and in fact there were a couple calls to the plane that tried to get made but were never connected. But what they noticed was because the satellite, even though the satellite couldn't tell you exactly where the plane was, it could do kind of a Doppler effect thing. So saying like how long did it take for the signal to go back and forth, it could kind of give you a huge circle on the earth of like this is how far it was from the satellite, and then at some point the signal suddenly cut off, and that's where they think the airplane finally went crashing into the ocean.
Right.
So this I think is going to tie into some of the theories that you're about to go into.
Right. I guess, since we've just arrived a little bit over the 1 hour mark, I think we can get into the theories now. So let's begin. Like, I have some wacky ones, and then lastly, I think you and me are both in an agreement what actually happened. So we will give our, as you've said, Solvable Mysteries Podcast solution to this problem. So okay, so let's begin. So the first one that I have here marked is hijacking, right? So the Malaysian Airlines Flight 370 was hijacked. Now let me just quickly find where the craziness begins on the assets that I've prepared. Okay, we can start with these guys. So basically it's a hijacking. So what I have here is the possibility of a simple hijacking has been brought up by various news outlets, including ABC News and the Los Angeles Times. Speculation has mounted about the possibility that hijackers took the plane to a remote island, although no group has claimed responsibility. However, unofficial researchers have identified more than 600 possible runways at which the plane was capable of landing. There's like a whole bunch more information regarding this theory. Quickly, do you believe that this is a logical theory? Over 600 potential landing strips. I just think that we would have found out by now. Like a lot of people were on that plane. I mean, how do you even do that? Like, how many different countries' airspaces do you have to go to?
Exactly, to show up. And then not only that, but it's like the whole point of hijacking an airplane with passengers is to make it public, to use them as leverage. So why
we will get into some theories that's not necessarily the case.
Okay.
But I know what you mean. Like, that's definitely the logical thing to do. But there's some freaky theories, Okay, let me just see this. Okay, so the second one is, I guess, links up with the first one, is electronic hijacking. So this issue, I don't know, man, why are we showing Kim Jong-un's face? Like, maybe let's switch to something else. Right, so we have, by the way, the express.co.uk. I love these guys, they make the best articles. Okay, so MH370 revelation: real reason Malaysia Airlines plane was hijacked so quickly exposed. So these guys already figured out that it was hijacked a long time ago. They're just now revealing the reasons. Okay, so essentially, I'm just going to read off my own thing here. Electronic hijacking uses systems and programming already factory installed within the B77 flight management system. So within the plane that essentially was missing. This different form of hijacking, a cyber attack, in that it requires access to the B777's security system, though access purposefully programmed into the software. Notable proponents of this theory includes former Malaysian Prime Minister Mahathir Mohamad. So basically, I'm not sure if it's the super corrupt Gucci bag Prime Minister. Maybe he is, maybe he's not. I'm not gonna get too much into it. I don't think it has been electronically hijacked. The only reason why the Prime Minister of Malaysia was sort of okay with this theory is because obviously this would protect like the reputation of Malaysia, and the Malaysian government definitely doesn't want anyone thinking that so a Malaysian national would hijack an airplane. That's impossible, right? Well, I don't know if it's that impossible. Right. So we have another one that I gave you the link prior to this podcast. I don't know, man. I think you could chime in a little bit on this one because I didn't really do too much digging regarding this one. Let me just find the assets right. So this is Jeff Weiss. He is a technology writer, and he has developed a theory in which basically the aircraft's controls were taken over by hijackers from the electronics and equipment bay, accessible through a hatch in the first class cabin floor. Weiss theorizes that the Inmarsat satellite pings were a deliberately laid false trail created by feeding the plane's satellite communications system false data, which in turn caused the system to make false frequency corrections. These would, when later scrutinized, lead investigators to conclude the plane was headed south, when, according to Weiss's theory, it actually flew north. And this is where he loses me. Flew north and possibly landed at Baikonur Cosmodrome in Kazakhstan. So, obviously he had to put the cherry on top of the cake there, and I guess that's when he lost me. I don't know, any input on your end?
Yeah, I mean, it's like basically landing at the Russian version of Cape Kennedy or Cape
Right.
Cape Canaveral. I mean, it seems like, once again, you'd have to overfly a lot of places. You'd have to keep a lot of secrets. Plus, I forget, what's that movie with Wesley Snipes and Kurt Russell and Steven Seagal where they take over the airplane? You know what I'm talking about?
But I need to find out. I need to watch it.
Yeah, it's
today.
like a big time '90s blockbuster. I mean, I think it gets too
crazy, right? Too wild.
Too complicated. Yeah, I mean, it was interesting piece of research that he essentially said that a couple of the folks on board who were Russian nationals were maybe sleeper agents or something. I mean, like I said, it was an interesting theory.
Right.
And it turned out the guy had been right about some other things.
So he's a smart guy, by the way.
Yeah. He's not a dummy.
He's really smart. I can definitely tell he's smarter than me in regards to all of this technology stuff.
It's a theory it was worth doing the exercise, but I think, even he in the article said that part of him didn't believe it, and his wife for sure didn't believe it. She gave it like a 5% chance of being true. So his theory is, when you draw that big circle of when something is how far the airplane could have gone,
right?
That it was at the complete opposite end of where everybody else said it was. So everybody else is looking south and is saying, oh no, this thing is north, and went to where there's this huge runway, and somehow, once again, I don't see why Putin would, because he's blaming it on Putin, and I don't know, it is worth mentioning
that Russia is highly influencing Kazakhstan and all of the Central Asian states. I mean, that's how it's always been. I guess that's just a natural power projection of any country. So it's a natural thing.
And it is the actual main space center, I think, that they leased
during the Soviet times. I think they had a lot of work done there in that area regarding aerospace stuff, right?
I think even now, I think it just there's places the reason why space operations happen where they do on certain parts of the Earth is because they're in a geographically convenient place to get into orbit properly. So that's why, it isn't like you can just, if you want to get into a certain kind of orbit, you can't just build a space center anywhere. Like you have to actually
like
build
in
it.
Poland or something, right?
Yeah. It's
Because
gotta
they
be,
actually tried them and they didn't get their space program
Which-
because you didn't give them the money or something like that. So it was a funny situation that also illustrates that not all land masses can do that.
Yeah, I mean, it really depends. I think also what the trajectory is of the object you want. So, like maybe an object going a different way around the Earth, it would make sense. But for how a lot of things need to travel, yeah, that's why a lot of the bases
Yeah.
are closer to the equator.
So we
Yeah.
are ruling this out. Like I'm personally ruling this out. I don't think
Yeah.
so. I just don't see the reason. Why Russia would need to hijack this plane. Maybe Russia was doing that whole Crimea invasion situation, or allegedly invasion, allegedly political. Takeover, which was legal allegedly, but probably illegal or maybe legal. So it's up to everyone to decide what happened there. But let's see here. What's happened? I mean, it was illegal. We can all pretty much say that, but yeah. Let's move on. I guess from this political stuff, and what I have next is it's about North Korea, so some more political stuff. What do I have here? A story circulated on Reddit that MH370 had sufficient fuel to be hijacked to North Korea, as was done in 1969 with the Korean Airlines YS-11. What was that all about? I've never heard about that one. So, okay, so in late July 2015, in an article about MH370 conspiracy theories, The Independent briefly mentioned that it had received an email claiming the US has authorized the plane to be shot down because it was allegedly carrying a nuclear warhead to North Korea, though The Independent immediately added the joke, or it could still be aliens. Right, so yeah, I'm gonna discredit all of this. I just don't see how that was the case. Now another one that's, yeah, this is just a good picture right here. Right, so this theory, we have this theory. This theory had some weight, at least held some weight initially, because a lot of people thought that this was what actually happened, but it turned out to be not the case, at least in my eyes. So basically, shortly after the aircraft disappeared, some news agencies reported that it may have been an act of, terrorism, possibly a jihadist attack. Between 9 and 14th of March 2014, media mogul Rupert Murdoch, I'd never heard about this guy, tweeted that Flight 370 disappearance confirms jihadists turning to make trouble for China. He later suggested the flight may have been hidden in northern Pakistan like bin Laden. These remarks have not been confirmed and were characterized as conspiracy theories by Shiv Malik, The Guardian. The following month, the Russian newspaper, I'm not going to pronounce it because it's Russian, endorsed a similar theory, claiming that unknown terrorists had hijacked the plane, flown it to Afghanistan, and then held the crew and passengers hostage. But no one claimed, no terrorist organization actually claimed responsibility. So it's immediately a red flag, because when a terror act is committed, these organizations immediately claim that they did it, but there was no such claim in this particular situation. So I'm definitely disregarding that it was an attack by terrorists, because I just think that it would have been claimed by one of the terrorist organizations immediately, maybe even a little bit prior to it happening or something.
Yeah. I mean, maybe literally as soon as it happened, wanting.
Right.
I mean, usually you see everybody piling on, especially because China is getting involved because of the situation with the Uyghurs. Anybody like Al Qaeda or ISIS or someone like that, they wouldn't have hesitated to try to hurt China's feelings, let's say.
Right, but these guys, these two people, I have an article. So these were Iranians, two Iranian men essentially, who were flying on the plane essentially that went missing with fake passports. So Interpol releases images of two men who used stolen documents to take flight that disappeared. So essentially, this was like, these two guys, like, they definitely were like odd, like they had fake documentations on the plane. So you can't not look into them, like you just can't, because they had fake documents, fake passports. One of the dude was 19 years of age, and the other one was 29. So, and they were friends. So it's a pretty big age difference to be Iranian friends and flying from Malaysia to Beijing. But their initial story was on them that they were supposed to meet up with one of one of these men's mother in Germany to seek asylum, because they were like asylum seekers from Iran. But for some reason they were in Malaysia, flying to Beijing, and in Malaysia they met another friend of theirs, another Iranian person. So I don't know, it's a little bit of a interesting story, but I guess the other evidence that we collected from this case sort of outweighs this theory. But this is probably, I'm not gonna, maybe it's actually like the second theory that I would be looking into it, because like the hijacking ones are just too wild for me. So this probably the second thing that I would be looking at, if none of the other interesting details would have not came up. What are your thoughts, man?
Yeah, I mean, part of me thought like it's just exactly what you said, that if it wasn't for the other evidence, it would be one of those things that you'd, at least, I mean, given what had happened historically with 9/11, etc., with people with paperwork and what part of the world they came from. But then, like, I mean, it is worth mentioning, I don't think there have been any specifically terrorists from Iran that have done any hijackings like this in quite some time. Like maybe
Right.
literally like decades. Like I want to say maybe even since like, I don't know if there ever have been
Right.
Iranian hijackers. And then, so that's one thing. But then the other thing is, it makes you wonder, like two things. One is, it makes you wonder how many flights have people that have fake paperwork, and we never hear about it because everything goes fine. And then boy, like it sucks for them. Like, geez, you're trying to you're trying to get asylum or something, and you pick the one friggin' flight that gets hijacked by someone else, or
Right, but how are you?
Something else happens, yeah.
But how are you seeking asylum in Germany by flying from Malaysia to Beijing? But
China, yeah.
That probably
Get
makes
it.
sense. It probably makes sense. We just probably don't have the information, so it probably
Maybe there's
definitely
some
makes
other
sense.
way, yeah.
Something, maybe they were just meeting up for a short period of time. It probably definitely makes sense, but it was just odd in that way. Who definitely disagrees with us? The Times of Israel. They essentially say Iran, an expert, not the Times of Israel, likely involved in MH370. So definitely people from that line over, because there's like a lot of friction between Iran and Israel. So I just thought it was interesting, that the Times of Israel actually sort of made a publication that Iran likely involved in MH370, or at least some expert claimed. So I think that's odd, but it makes sense. Right, so we have, as I've said before, we had the North Korean involvement. Now, I don't think North Korea did it. I just think it's too crazy of a story. Plus, there was no need for North Koreans to hijack the plane. What is the reason for North Korea to hijack the plane? They're doing other things at that point. Working on other stuff.
I mean, I'll also jump in. Like, I understand where that comes from, actually, because North Korea had actually been notorious for kidnapping people, specifically from Japan. So that it actually had
Okay.
had kidnapped a bunch of Japanese citizens, but I would say, especially because it was Chinese mainland citizens that were involved, I would say that would actually, it would be the exact reason why they wouldn't hijack the airplane, because
I didn't even
yeah.
connect the dots. You just made perfect sense. Like China and North Korea, they have like pretty close ties. You know, they were historic allies throughout like different wars and different time periods. So there's yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's even worth pointing out that honestly, like, China is the only reason why North Korea is still afloat right now, because without China, North Korea would have probably imploded and you know, been on a different course right now.
That's not what the North Koreans would tell you, but you know, it's people have their theories. I mean, they do. Then you know, they're like they do some good things in regards to probably something, you know, I just can't mention it right now. So they probably do some good work there, but
I would say China probably. I mean, at this point, it's probably, maybe we could do another episode, but yeah, I mean,
I think we should pass up on that.
Yeah. There's such a tsunami of a human like a crisis that would happen if and when that place collapses, because of just the starvation and just the amount of money. I've heard that in comparison to like when East Germany
this is a different thing. Yeah,
yeah. I mean, so like the amount of money that would have to be spent on North Korea to like bring it up to normal standards is like 4 to 10 times the amount that it took to bring East Germany even close to West German standards when they had the reunification. So
right. Also another thing I've heard that you know, I've seen some interviews with the South Korean people, and you know, most like young generation of South Koreans, they're not really that in on the whole idea, you know, of like unification. So I'm not sure if that's is even possible ever, you know, because
even in the cards,
the South Korean people, they're not really that high and mighty on that theory, you know. Right, let's move in. Acquisition of Freescale staff. So there was a bunch of okay, so this is like some financial stuff, a financial thing right here. So there was like a bunch of staff from like Freescale, semiconductor, and 20% each of 4 employees, all of whom were passengers on the plane. The patent deals with fabrication of integrated circuits on a semiconductor wafer. The urban myth website snopes.com suggests that there is no evidence that the 4 inventors listed on the patent application were on the aircraft passenger list, nor that they were entitled to a 20% share of the patent. So there was some sort of people who worked for a company allegedly that were inventing stuff that were, you know, expensive stuff and had patents and stuff like that. But you know, it's just like to me, it just seems like people just trying to find something, you know, out of nothing. So passing up on this theory, there was this conspiracy theory with Diego Garcia. So Diego Garcia is a real place. It's a military base that essentially belongs to the United States. It's in the British Indian Ocean Territory. Or that the plane, essentially the theory states that the plane landed directly after being instructed to travel there. The latter theory was raised at a White House daily briefing on 18th of March, whereupon Press Secretary Jay Carney responded, "I'll rule that one out." And I guess I'll respond in the same way. You know, I'm ruling this one out. It's allegedly because someone on that plane or something on that plane was of such high importance that the United States government didn't want that thing to travel to Beijing, you know? So they were like, let's hijack this plane and let's land it in Diego Garcia. There was like a text message from someone from like claiming that he's in Diego Garcia. Like there was this whole conspiracy theory. I don't know, man. Just a little bit too far fetched for me, for now at least. Given the other evidence. So I'm ruling this one out. How about you, man?
Yeah, me too. It just doesn't.
Just doesn't
Plausible.
Right. So this is the route.
Like,
this is the route.
Wouldn't we just bribe the Malaysians and get them to storm the plane? Like, you know what I mean? Like, why? Yeah.
Why do we have to? Why do people in the United States have to like go through all of this work?
Yeah.
But there was a situation where some people in the Maldives that you see right here actually reported seeing a Malaysian Airlines logo on a plane flying pretty low, like around Maldives. But I'm sure it's probably fabricated because like the British Indian Ocean Territory and Maldives are fairly far apart. Like you would not see an airplane, from all over there. So I don't know, man. I'm just like ruling out this particular theory. Let's see what I have else because I'm right. Okay, this one was a crazy one. There's like a theory. Cambodia, yeah, like this was a crazy one. So Google Maps, could this be MH370 spotted in the Cambodian jungle? What happened to the jet? So there are Google Map images. Essentially, maybe this is like a crash site or something, I don't know. But there are like Google Map images, essentially something like that. Don't want to get into this detail any further because there's this one, I guess, cherry on top of the cake in this theory. Some British people went actually there to investigate this theory in the Cambodian jungle, they alleged, but they could not find the particular landing place or like crash site of this plane because the Cambodian jungle was filled with meth head lagers. So this is their real explanation, and they made, and that's what they went with, that there were people who like illegal loggers who were illegally cutting down trees for profit, and they were all high on meth, so they couldn't get past they obviously could not get past that situation. If I see that if I'm like anywhere near like a situation like that, I'm turning around, so
yeah.
Can't blame them, right? You can't blame them.
Yeah, plus you got to figure, like, with all the secret air operations we had over there's probably tons of crashed airplanes out there that have been shot down during the war, crashed.
Unexploded mines. Just waiting for someone to step on them. Yes.
It'd be like the worst place to go to. Yeah, I mean, if that's where they landed, they're done. They're not coming back.
I'm not sure, man. Which is okay. So, Cambodia crash site of missing Malaya airplane, 99% likely. So someone believes this theory at least. Oh, it's the Express guys once again. Yeah, like these guys. As I've said, I love these guys. Right, so they are 99% likely according to the Express, so I don't know, man. Right, let's keep moving. Once again, Express revealed the lost passengers of tragic Malayan Airlines. Okay, so these guys were like really covering this in depth. There's a theory that someone in the staff was involved. These are pretty much like the staff members. Someone from the staff was involved. I feel like it's playing like like one of those detective games. Who did it? Like finding out. But I think we have a pretty good grasp of which one of the staff members did it. So at least allegedly. Right. So let's keep moving. I think we're almost done with the theories. I have crew suicide hijacking, which is partly what I believe happened, but this particular theory was too crazy. We have the fire theory that, as you've known, there were like lithium batteries, right? It was lithium batteries in the storage of the actual plane, and lithium batteries actually caused multiple fires to airplanes back in the day. on multiple occasions. So this is not that far-fetched. A fire may have started. Do you have any input in regards to the fire theory?
Yeah, I mean, it doesn't. To me, that doesn't make sense. Why it doesn't make them do a U-turn and then fly. Turn off their transponder, do a U-turn, and then zigzag flight, and then somehow stay aloft all that time. Yeah, it doesn't make sense to me.
Why would you not contact anyone if there's a fire?
Yeah, or why wouldn't, if they said, oh, well, the fire caused a power failure and this, that, and the other thing. Well, like, how did it fly perfectly? Like it was enough to knock out the radios and all these other things, but not disrupt the autopilot or otherwise, cause a problem, or yeah, it doesn't make sense to me.
Doesn't make sense to me as well. Well, you could probably try to reason that there has been some sort of autopilot installed, or there was an autopilot malfunction, that a fire caused people to lose capabilities of their electronic devices. They can't call anyone. Right, and that's how that whole situation went down. But I just personally don't buy it. I think it's too crazy, man. Someone would have called it. Right. We also have shutdown hypothesis. So, right, cyber attack on plane. We have avionics chip malware showed phantom cockpit controls. We have, this list just goes on and on and on. A year of plane tragedies. Right, yeah, it did come in threes. I guess, in conclusion, because, we forgot to mention a few other ones, I think. In conclusion, I still have the black hole theory that, it's actually past a black hole, so it's a theory. It's a theory, and then we have the meteor theory as well, that a meteor hit the plane, right? So I'm ruling those ones out as well, and right. So I'm done with the theories, or the theories that I don't believe are correct. And now to the theory that we believe is actually correct. Before we do that, I would actually like to talk a little bit about Malaysian Airlines. So if I see a Malaysian airline logo or something like that, I'm running. I'm running as fast as I can. If I see it flying over me, I'm running. I'm taking the car, I'm driving really fast, far away from anything that has this particular logo. Save your flight value. I don't know what this sentence means. Save your flight value. Right. I'm just running, and right. I feel like this image right here is gonna be in my nightmares. So yeah, I'm just unfortunate thing. But Malaysia, I feel like it was made to be bankrupt. Also, we have this little thing. I'm just gonna leave it here. So the Malaysian Airlines 370 is in fact the most stealthy airplane of all time. It actually managed to disappear. That's all we have, man. And we have why researchers questioned if this proves meteor took plane down.
Oh my gosh! Yeah,
I don't know. I don't know. We don't probably don't need to.
There's so many. I mean, it's like.
Yeah.
So it turns out that probably the most likely explanation is also one that once we had all of the info, made a lot of sense. So and then get to your point, poor Malaysian Airlines, because they didn't only have this, but then about a year later or so?
4 months.
4 months. Wow, 4 months. Not even one of a year. Yeah, they get
shot
their
down.
airplane gets shot down over disputed area of Ukraine,
right?
And a whole other episode, and that thing, is another kind of comedy of errors, and sad situation. But and then that one actually did involve Putin. But in this case, what they think happened is, the pilot, the captain, let's say, Captain Zahari, It's alleged that his personal life was not so happy now. There was rumors that he'd had
Right.
affairs with like flight attendants and stuff.
It's the Mora Muri Discovery ID effect, you know?
Yeah. It's because it's interesting because people said, well, there was some unhappiness in his personal life, and his wife had recently moved out with the adult kids, I guess, and apparently I think he was probably having like a midlife crisis. Honestly, it sounds like he was looking for other women and trying to maybe pick up on like models and stuff on Facebook, and I mean just doing stuff that is not unusual for men in general, and especially older men when the hormonal changes happen, and you've sort of hit every other milestone in your life, and maybe life gets boring and life has less challenges, and maybe you're even questioning like, well, what's life all about at this point, or what am I living for? So that's not unusual.
Right.
It's also not unusual to maybe run into depression and other things like that at that age, especially if you're going through big life changes, and if your wife is acting like maybe she's going to leave you and you're worried about getting embarrassed. Now there was like some people that tried to refute that and said, oh, all of us pilots have affairs with the flight attendants, and our lives are fine. And it's like, well, yeah, maybe for you, dude, but that doesn't mean that not everyone's wife's fine with that. So
I'm sure the percentage of the wives of the pilots would be fairly low. If you did a case study.
Yeah. I mean, I think that I don't think that they're okay with it. Like, for whoever said that probably was like 1 month away from this happening to him too.
Right.
So it is worth pointing out. So here's the theory. The theory is that the captain had probably potentially been planning some kind of suicide, and in fact, there's allegations that on the flight simulator there was a very similar course found amongst the kind of practice courses he had. So you can make like your own little flight plans and stuff you want to practice, that he had essentially plotted some kind of similar suicide course on his computer, where you would just take the plane and fly it as far as you could fly it in some weird direction. I think it is interesting when you pointed out that he flew by his old home, so maybe that's why. And maybe I thought, in a way, I thought it was kind of like maybe a kind of psychosis or a kind of psychopathic thing, where like he was willing to sacrifice other people's lives to end it in what he thought was an interesting way. So he's like, oh, well, I'm going to do it anyway. Gee, I wonder if I could do this. So here's the thing. What has been insinuated happened is when he took the airplane up to 35,000 feet, it looks like at some point it went up to 40,000 feet. And they think what he probably did was at any altitude above, like, I don't know, 19,000 feet or so. I mean, it's probably the extreme where like humans can even stay conscious. But it's well known that humans need oxygen to breathe and live.
Yeah.
And airplanes are pressurized. So when you're in an airplane, they're keeping the air pressure and giving you enough oxygen so that you're not going to suffocate and die. And if they didn't do that, everybody would very quickly pass out. And in fact, that's why when airplanes lose pressure... But would they
die? But that's the thing that I didn't understand. Would they actually die?
Oh, yeah. You'll die very quickly.
Oh, wait. So he depressurized the airplane, and all of the passengers died well before...
Oh yeah, they were all dead. Whoa, yeah. It was a ghost plane. So except for him. So here's the way it works is in the plane, and when you fly in a plane, they give you that little thing about when the masks come down. So there's two sets of emergency equipment in the plane. If it depressurizes, if a plane depressurizes, there's masks that drop down for the passengers, and those have, I think, something like 5 to 10 minutes of oxygen for every passenger. That's it. If the captain,
holy cow, that's so little.
It's so little because what's supposed to happen is at that point, the pilots are supposed to drop the airplane down to like 10,000 feet so everybody can breathe again.
Okay, I get it.
So then it's fine. Yeah, then you're fine. But then meanwhile, the captain and the pilot, they have oxygen they have hours worth of oxygen, because they can't, for whatever reason, if it needs to take longer, or maybe they need to be at an altitude that's sort of iffy, because I don't know when the last time is that you were up above 10,000 feet, but it sucks. Like, if you're not used to it,
right?
It's it's not fun. I the last time I was up in the Rocky Mountains, up that high, I was like really not enjoying myself for the 3 days I was up there like that. So yeah, so what they think happened is he probably made some excuse, because we don't have the black boxes, we don't know, but we think that he probably made some excuse to get the co-pilot out of the cockpit. And interestingly enough, in the Wikipedia we were looking at for kind of crazy theories, what wasn't crazy was that this hasn't happened before. So actually, there was an Ethiopian airline, I think, that where the guy one of the pilots wanted to get asylum in Switzerland, so he made an excuse for the other guy to get out of the cockpit. And all the cockpit doors have locks now ever since 9/11, to keep hijackers out. So unfortunately, it also makes it so that one pilot could, in theory, lock out the other, because there's not a way to get in once you're out. That
Right.
on purpose, because
Right.
they don't want to make it so that. So here's the interesting thing: is the next year, we actually saw a similar situation where a much younger man, who was flying, I think it's German Air. What is this? Let me see. It was German Wings, flight 9525.
Okay.
What happened? This is kind of crazy. The guy did like a different version of this, where the captain went out to go use the bathroom or something,
Right.
and the co-pilot, who was suicidal, it turned out he had been labeled as being depressive and not fit for work, but his employer didn't know it. The captain goes out, he locks the captain out, and then this is the crazy part. The passengers are sitting there watching the captain like plead with the, like, knock on the door. Can you let me in, please? Can you let me in? And then the plane's going lower and lower and lower. And on the and on the black box.
You sound like a.
I'm just saying just because it's such a like horror, it's like a horror movie. But like unlike the black box, which they did get, you can hear the passengers start to scream as like they realize they're going to hit the mountains, as they realize oh my god, when they realize what happened, right? That this guy.
That's so dark. Like, I don't want to listen to that because I feel like I'm gonna have nightmares, man.
Yeah, it's dark, right? So I mean, I guess they don't think that's what happened here. What happened here instead is if you're up at 40,000 feet and the captain suddenly depressurizes it, yeah, you're going to notice that. You're going to feel like, oh my gosh, I can't breathe. Now, he could do it slower, which like, it's interesting because that's actually something that happens too, is sometimes airplanes slowly lose their pressurization and the pilot doesn't know it. And there's actually a point at which your mind starts not operating right before you actually pass out. But at some point, whether it happens slow or quickly, you pass out and then you suffocate. So they think what happened was he probably got the other guy out of the cockpit, locked the door, took it up to 40,000 feet right away while he depressurized it, just to get the air out as fast as he could. And then he was on the oxygen mask, and then everybody in the plane's dead. And there was a this was kind of before your time, Juras, but there was a famous golfer who this happened to his plane. He was famous golfer here in the United States, and he had his own private plane, his own like jet, like a I think it was a Gulfstream or something.
Right.
And the plane lost pressurization slowly, and the pilots didn't realize it. And then so what happened was air traffic control's like, hey, this plane isn't responding, and we don't think it's been hijacked. It's just flying like the same way. It's on autopilot. It just seems like it's on autopilot. It's not doing anything. And they sent up a jet to go, like a fighter jet to go look at it.
Right.
And they're like, oh yeah, it's all fogged up. They're all dead in there. Ghost plane. Jesus
Christ! That actually happened. Oh my god!
Yeah, and it was like a high end golfer. It was like a big time, older pro golfer.
But what happened to the plane? Where did it land?
It crashed.
It's almost like a missile at that point,
Yeah, exactly. And it's like one of those things where they got to see if it's going to actually crash into a city, then they got to shoot it down. But if it's just going to crash into the desert somewhere.
So where did it crash? Do you know?
I can't remember. It was somewhere out in the countryside though.
Okay.
It wasn't. Yeah, it was.
Holy cow!
got
Like
there in
that
time,
story
but-
is crazy, man.
So it happens. But then in this case, they think it was intentional. The guy did it on purpose. He had a whole plan. And then okay, so here's the other thing: is like people say, well, where's the evidence? Okay, well, there was evidence. So once they figured out that it probably crashed way farther away than what the Malaysian government was saying, one of the articles we were researching from the Atlantic was pointing out there's a guy who kind of made it his little hobby or his little life's purpose for a while to figure this out. And he went to Australia and he went to islands in that area or near Australia.
Seems like a guy who had a lot of time on his hand.
Yeah,
And money.
exactly. The guy had like a really interesting life. He kind of had done a lot, had been all around the world, but yeah, this was like his little cause for a couple of years, and then he made it sort of.
But I respect him. But I definitely respect this dude. Like for doing this. If I had like the time and the extra money,
Yeah.
I would do something like that. Because I would definitely want to find out what actually happened and listen into the black boxes. So whoever this guy was, like, definitely high respect for him.
Yeah, and it wasn't even to make money or write a book or anything. It was just he just cared. He went to the memorial stuff for the victims and talked to people.
Straight up guy, definitely.
Yeah, he just cared. So, and he put his money where his mouth was. So he did. He spent a lot of time, and he ended up being part of this effort that found parts. So there's been certain parts of the airplane that have turned up on the shore of like Australia and other, even though the places it floats, they float up are pretty far away from each other. If you kind of looking at the ocean currents where it came from, it's pretty much where we think the airplane probably crashed, which was somewhere down in the Indian Ocean. So pretty far away. So I guess that, from that perspective, then I think it seems like it's case closed. Now, before I think we wrap up the show or before we end the show, one of the things I did want to address is, I think I especially am notorious in the show of kind of being critical of like police and critical of governments and why didn't they try harder or why didn't they do this or that. But you know what, I'm gonna and especially like I said, a lot of the people in China, understandably, they're upset that like their loved ones' remains weren't found, or I guess maybe they were under the illusion that anything could have been done. I'll be realistically, their families were doomed the moment this guy decided to put his plan into place and nobody knew about it. So there was never going to be any rescuing anybody. That plane plunged right into the ocean, smashed like an orange dropped off the top of a skyscraper. I mean, there's no one survived that. So, but I guess for the need for closure, here's the thing. So people are like, well, why didn't Malaysia tell us about their secret radar data? And it's like, well, you know what? Put yourself in Malaysia's place. So Malaysia, corrupt or not, Malaysia's got a military plan. They've got a radar. They've gone to all this effort and money to have this secret, this very sensitive radar coverage that's kind of critical to like, if they do go to war, what's going to happen. And then this dummy commit suicide, and for 220 people's lives, they're going to sacrifice their entire national military strategy. Like that's the situation which they ended up having to do. So because of this guy who had nothing to do with anything, it wasn't even political, it wasn't religious. There
was some implications about him being a little bit political, to be honest with you.
Really, that was.
He had like shown his disdain to the current political like leaders, especially to the prime minister, on like his Facebook posts, which there's a good reason to do that. I mean, the guy had like millions in Gucci bags, so
But I mean, was he willing to undermine his country's national defense? So I guess that's the question.
He didn't think that through. I think that other things like in his life led to this event.
Yeah,
that was not like the main reason, but yeah,
it wasn't to help China win a future war or something. So that's where it's like. I mean, you can see like just. I think I tried to put myself in like a different situation. I was like, okay, let's say it had been a plane full of Australians that had flown over Area 51, and we had like a UFO there that had like that
That's
had
it,
like, or whatever
Right.
kind of secret aircraft. We had a special aircraft that
Santa
could see
Claus.
through the airplane and know exactly what's going on. Would we tell anybody?
No.
Like we wouldn't tell anybody our secrets just because of this, Australian airliner or whatever it was. Like it just, but then Malaysia ended up having to tell the secret. So that was the part that was like, I get why people in China are upset, but I also get why, if you're like a general in the Malaysian military, you're like, no, don't tell them. Like we spent 20 years getting this in place and keeping it secret, and now because of this dummy who stole an airplane, now we have to tell like our main
Right.
defense secrets. So that was, I kind of felt some sympathy for
The
corrupt
Malaysian, right?
Malaysian government.
I mean, the government. I don't think they need any sympathy, because like most people in that government, probably are like out and about, like 3 Gucci bags on their neck, filled with stacks of money. So
Filled with money, yeah.
right. So the Malaysian government probably is okay with everything by now. They're probably doing pretty well. I would argue. So yeah, I'm definitely in agreement with you. So I guess we both are sort of leading in the same direction, that the pilot actually committed suicide for reasons that his life was probably in turmoil at that point, and the Malaysian government also tried to cover that up, tried to portray him as this perfect person, but he probably was not, obviously speaking to all of those like models on Facebook or Instagram or whatever. Like not the type of it paints a different portrait of the Malaysian government did. So I think we're both in agreement. I'm definitely leaning towards the same theory. I guess in my eyes it's case solved. I don't know, man. We are approaching that 2-hour mark now, so I'd probably be leaning towards wrapping the show up. I mean, I don't know, man. Any final piece, I don't know, man, of advice to the audience, like stay away from Malaysian Airlines.
No, I mean, honestly, I feel bad for Malaysian Airlines even, because it just feels like they got victimized too. Like this is one of those things where, as much as you tell people to try to screen their employees and
Right.
try to watch out for it, it's like sometimes someone who's just determined to do something sick and horrible. I mean, if he was going to kill himself, I wish he would have just done it to himself and not to 230 other people. So
His
that's
obsession,
just the sad part,
obsession with airplanes is actually a dangerous thing now.
Yeah.
Just in general, like obsession with airplanes is a dangerous thing right now. Because it could go really, really badly, really, really fast, like it did in the airplane, like in this case. So I don't know, man. Since we're wrapping it up, I guess this has been episode 40. This was a little bit of different case, but it was also a mysterious case. I feel like it was just a matter of time before we had to like talk about this case. I always wanted to return to this one. I feel like I have a lot more information now after we did this research and did this podcast about the case and about the some of the let's put it interesting theories that are surrounding this whole disappearance. And yeah, guys, catch us on episode number 41. For now, stay safe, protect your families during the epidemic times, and we will catch you on the next episode. Peace out.